Here are some great smaller museums that fly under the radar. Hi there, everyone. I'm Jeff, and this is Plain English, where we help you upgrade your English with stories about current events and trending topics. Today on Plain English, you'll learn about some of the great museums in the United States. Not the big ones like the Met or the Air and Space Museum. We talked about those on Monday. There are so many smaller regional museums about just one topic or just one artist, and there are hundreds of them. So this is not a comprehensive list, but I have been to every museum in this episode, and I recommend them all. And even if you can't go, I think you'll enjoy learning about them. The expression we'll talk about later is pop culture. This is lesson 691, so you can find the full lesson at plainenglish.com/691. Before we dive into today's story, you've heard me mention some of the great ways our Plus membership can help you upgrade your English, and you might be curious about what that looks like. We've recently unlocked some free samples so that you can try out the premium features for yourself. Even if you don't join, you'll still learn something from the sample lessons. Sound good? Look for the link that says free samples at the top of plainenglish.com. I've also put a direct link to the samples at the bottom of the show notes of this episode. Now, we're ready to start today's story. On Monday, we started with art museums. Let's do the same today. Some museums are focused on just one artist. The Andy Warhol Museum is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the artist's hometown. Andy Warhol was a visual artist who lived in the mid-20th century. His style was pop art. He used images from pop culture as his inspiration. One of his most famous pieces is a silkscreen painting of Campbell's soup cans. He did a series of paintings of Marilyn Monroe, Coca-Cola, dollar bills, photos of important events, celebrities like Elizabeth Taylor and Elvis Presley. These all gave him inspiration. The Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh is the largest museum in the world dedicated to a single artist. I like museums that depict what life was like in times gone by. And one of the best museums for that is the Lower East Side Tenement Museum. It's a single brick apartment building at 97 Orchard Street in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. It looks just like many other buildings on the block, and that's the point. The museum tells the story of immigrants who lived in that building and in a nearby building in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Life for new arrivals was tough. People lived in tenements, buildings full of small, cheap apartments to rent. And the Tenement Museum recreates rooms and apartments just how they would have looked all those years ago. Another great museum in New York, the Museum of the Moving Image. This is in Queens, one of the 5 boroughs of New York City. The moving image. This is television, this is film, and this is the early days of motion pictures. The museum has a television from 1939, one of the earliest TVs. The very earliest moving images were personal portable devices. You looked into them and cranked a handle. The museum also has some modern innovations. It shows you a clip of how a modern sports broadcast is produced. Speaking of sports, the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum is in New York State. The museum honors the best baseball players in history and tells the story of America's pastime throughout its long history. The Roberto Clemente Museum in Pittsburgh is a great baseball museum too. The National World War II Museum is in New Orleans, Louisiana. Why is there a war museum in New Orleans? The Higgins boat, the boats used by the Allies to land on the beaches of Normandy. The Higgins boats were invented in New Orleans. The museum opened in 2000, and it tells the story of World War II from an American perspective. New Orleans is at the mouth of the Mississippi River. Let's go up north to Minnesota, where the Mississippi River begins. One of my favorite small museums is there, the Mill City Museum. This one is an industrial museum. It shows how the upper Midwest region developed economically. The Midwest is farm country, and Minneapolis, because of its location on the river, was where a lot of the flour was milled for the bakeries that fed the nation. And the really spectacular thing about this museum is that it's built right into the ruins of a former flour mill. The mill exploded in 1878. A spark ignited the flour dust that was hanging in the air. 14 workers were killed. And the Mill City Museum is built into the ruins of this exploded factory. It's a great museum in a stunning location. The Mill City Museum in Minneapolis, Minnesota. If you're more musically inclined, check out the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, Ohio. The museum documents the history of rock music and all the people who make it possible. The musicians, sure, but also the producers, engineers, and others. The glass diamond entrance was designed by I.M. Pei, the architect who also designed the diamond entrance to the Louvre. You learned about him in lesson 164. I'll mention a few others quickly. As cities grew in the 1800s and 1900s, they established big art museums in the mold of the Met and the Art Institute. The economy has changed, people have moved, cities rose and fell, but the museums are largely still there. Kansas City, Cleveland, Detroit, especially Detroit, and Milwaukee all have great art museums. A couple more. Train buffs can visit the Transit Museum in New York City. You can see how they dug the subway tunnels. The Boston Public Library and New York Public Library have great galleries and exhibits. You can tour Thomas Edison's lab in West Orange, New Jersey. And one of the funniest ones I've been to, the Spam Museum in Austin, Minnesota. It's a museum dedicated to the spiced ham that you find in a tin can in the grocery store. I have been there. It's great. Now I'm going to teach you about the word pop culture. I'm sure you've heard this before. Pop stands for popular, and pop culture refers to things that are popular. Ideas, perspectives, attitudes, images, sounds, art, people, anything that's in the mainstream of culture at any given time. You might hear the expression pop culture references. And in fact, one of the hardest things about speaking a new language is understanding pop culture references. This is when someone references or mentions something that's part of daily life, part of the mainstream. But if you're not from the same country or culture, you probably won't understand some pop culture references. I try not to make too many pop culture references on plain English, but here's one you might recognize. Let's say someone is eliminated from a competition. Or let's say you're planning a party with friends or family and nobody likes your party ideas. They want to plan the party without you. You might jokingly say, "I was kicked off the island." Do you get that? That's a pop culture reference. That's a reference to the reality TV show Survivor, the losing contestants, the people excluded from the rest of the show were kicked off the island. Pop culture, then, is stuff that many people will understand because it is so popular. These things are part of the mainstream. It can be hard to nail down exactly what pop culture is. Pop culture can be television shows, it can be movies, celebrity news, music and musicians, true crime, even popular brands, advertising, or technology. TikTok challenges, viral memes, sayings, and phrases that people frequently use, these are all pop culture. Now, most museums don't have a lot of pop culture in them, but the Andy Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh has a lot of pop culture in it. Why? Because Andy Warhol was an artist who drew his inspiration from pop culture. One of his most famous paintings is a painting of Campbell's soup cans. You've probably seen Campbell's soup cans, right? They're red with the word Campbell's in script at the top and the flavor in the middle of the can. This is a great example of pop culture inspiration in Andy Warhol's art. Everyone who looks at that painting recognizes Campbell's soup. That painting, by the way, is at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Pop culture icons are people. Andy Warhol also painted and drew pop culture icons like Marilyn Monroe, a singer, Elizabeth Taylor, an actress, and Elvis Presley, also a singer. These were pop culture icons. They were popular, they were in the culture. People recognized them. They were pop culture icons. Who would be the pop culture icons of today? How about Taylor Swift or BTS? The Kardashians? They are pop culture. If you go to trivia night, this is like when a bar or restaurant hosts a quiz game. At trivia night, there will be question categories. You might have a category called science. You might have a category called politics. You might have one called sports or art. And there will probably be one called pop culture. Now, if that category is in your trivia game, you do not want me on your team. I won't know the answers. but I'll give you a few trivia questions that you might find in the pop culture category. Ready? Number 1. Joe Exotic is the focus of what Netflix documentary? Do you know it? Joe Exotic, Netflix documentary. Which one is it? The answer is Tiger King. Okay. Next question. Spare is the name of a memoir written by which notable public figure? A memoir, a non-fiction book. It's called Spare. Who's the author? I would know this one. I just read the book. Got it? Give up? It's by Prince Harry. Last question. What do people call their private Instagram accounts that they share with only their closest friends? Do you know it? Some people have their main accounts with thousands of followers, and then they have another account just for their trusted friends. What's that one called? If you said Finsta, you're right. So now you know this is pop culture, trends, celebrities, brands, advertising, music, movies, documentaries, books, people, ideas, everything in the mainstream, what people are talking about, what they're used to, what they would recognize. This is pop culture. You do not want me on your trivia team, no matter the category. I really am terrible at it. Anyway, that is all for Plain English. There's no category at trivia for things I know about. Like, there's no category for how do you put the fast audio, the slow audio, translations, quizzes, exercises, and practice areas all on the same page. And how do you number it by the episode number? I could answer that, but I don't know anything about Tiger King. Well, luckily luckily for me, JR, we both know how to put all the great lesson resources on the same page at plainenglish.com. And that page is plainenglish.com/691. Like always, you get to that page. There are 2 parts, the main story and the expression. Click on each to learn everything that's part of this lesson. plainenglish.com/691. See you right back here on Monday. You've reached the end of the audio lesson, but there's a lot more to the Plain English experience on the website plainenglish.com. A lot of plainenglish.com is free, but the best tools to help you upgrade your English are part of the Starter and Plus memberships. And if you've ever been curious about what those look like, well, I have good news for you. We've unlocked some free sample lessons that let you try out the Starter and Plus features for yourself. There are 2 easy ways to find the free samples. First, at plainenglish.com, there's a new link at the top of the page that says Free Samples. I've also put a link in the show notes for this episode. In the sample lessons, you can do the exercises, listen to the fast audio, take one of our toolkit workshops, practice your writing, and more. So try it out today. Click the link in the show notes of this episode, or find the link that says Free Samples at the top of plainenglish.com.